All right, hi everyone. We're gonna get started here. First of all, thank you all for coming. So this is part one of a two-part meeting. Today we're just gonna kind of focus on presenting you. We did a walkthrough assessment of the campus, you all are aware of that. We're gonna focus on presenting our findings from that. We might have a brief time for like some quick questions and answers, but we're really hoping that you take home the presentation. You should all have access to it via email or hard copies are in the back if you need it. Take home the presentation, read through it, and then come back next week with your questions. So, I'm so sorry, I forgot my train of thought now. So what we did is we did a walkthrough assessment. I feel that sometimes, if you're looking at spaces with a critical eye, it can seem a little bit harsh. That was not our intention. Our intention here is really to just kind of provide an honest assessment of our campus and try and open up a conversation with you guys so we can get as much feedback as we can from you. I'm going to invite Pastor Brogan up. She's going to say a prayer for us to start.
Friends, will you pray with me? Most gracious and loving God, we give thanks for these faithful disciples who have put their time, their energy, and their love into preparing today's presentation. We give thanks for those who are joining us in person and online to hear about our sanctuary, our campus, our church, our community, and to help us discern where we're headed next. Guide us in our conversations, guide us in our community, that we might draw ever closer to you. Amen. And friends, we'll note that Pastor Ruben, Jaime, and Lori, who are also members of this team, are unable to join us today, but also put a lot of their time and energy into helping create this presentation and do the work of this committee.
Okay, so I figured we would start. Car, are we having a problem or are we good? Oh, okay. Okay, so I just wanted to start by giving a little bit of background about us. So we are a studied committee, and we were called into formation by CFA at the request of the Board of Trustees. And what happened was the Board of Trustees was faced with a pretty big list of large-scale projects and maintenance problems, and they were faced with this big list, and they were all pretty costly. And per the Book of Discipline, when you have things that involve large-scale renovations or a certain budget amount, they recommend forming a study committee. So that's how we were formed. And what we're doing is we're analyzing the needs of our church and the needs of our community. And then what we do is we give a report and a recommendation back to the Board of Trustees, who takes that back to CFA. It's important to know that if our recommendation includes, a major change at all, CFA brings that back to the membership at a charge conference to vote on. So the vote does always kind of come back to the membership if there is a recommendation for like a large change. I just wanted to note that. So we started our work by first kind of determining what we felt our church's kind of fundamental values were. And we came up with worship, community, and being intergenerational, or having something to offer for all generations and ages. Our next step was, we had those values figured out, and then our next step was to figure out if those values were being interpreted the same way across our 3 congregations. So, some people might have a different interpretation of community, versus another person's interpretation of community. So we sent out a survey, hopefully you all partook in that, to try and figure out, what each congregation, what they interpreted those values as being. So the results of that survey were, for worship, each of the 3 congregations value very different things in worship. So that's apparent. We do have 3 separate congregations with very different worship services, so that makes sense. And then community, all 3 congregations agreed that community, they were defining it not just as us in our church family, but also outside around us and everyone. So we all kind of agreed on that. And then being intergenerational, the answers were pretty varied, but everybody thinks that we should have something to offer for all age groups. So what we did is we kept those values in mind when we started this assessment of the physical space of our campus. We came up with this little criteria that we used to, and we asked these questions in each space on the campus, and they are, is the space accessible to all people? What's it currently being used for? What is the potential use for the space? If it allows for growth, or if it only serves the people that are here now. The capacity, if it was welcoming or hospitable. We identified what the limitations were. We decided if we felt like it was an efficient use of our resources or not, and then we listed any necessary changes. So that was what we looked at in each space. You all have the presentation in front of you, so we're not going to kind of read through every single thing. We're just going to give you the highlights of what we overall felt on each space. And normally Lori would be coming up to take over at this point, but since she's not here, I'm just going to continue. So we started with the sanctuary. For this space, one of the things we noted it's large, it's very large, which is great. But we did note that sometimes such a large space makes it feel difficult to feel intimate. And then there's areas of the sanctuary that are not accessible, like the stage or the balcony or the sides. We only have 1 accessible bathroom in the back. And that's, that's essentially what we felt about the sanctuary. And we'll move on to the church office. The church office is kind of a huge problem in my mind. It's like completely inaccessible to anybody with any kind of disabilities. There's a stair everywhere. You can't get to it without going upstairs. So that's a problem that we identified. There's offices and workspaces for 3 out of the 4 pastors. Pastor Brogan's office is actually located downstairs in the basement. It was noted that the walls in the office are pretty thin, so it makes it difficult if you want to, go have a private conversation with your pastor. You can't really have a private conversation in those spaces. So we felt like that was a problem. It doesn't, other than that, it's just kind of dated. The layout's a little strange, yeah, so that's kind of it for the office upstairs. And we'll move down to the office downstairs. So this is that like common area. You come down the stairs and there's a common area. They use that space for prepping sack lunches and for counting offering. And then there's kind of a boiler room down there that's used for all storage. That room and all of the basement level rooms are facing some issues with water intrusion. And we'll kind of go into that more because the education building has the worst of that, so we'll talk more about that there, but those issues are present in all of the basement within the sanctuary and the office area. So for this space, it is, again, like a little bit of an awkward layout. It is just dated and old. The air quality seems to be a little bit of an issue because it is musty, probably from the water intrusion. And that's what we noted there. The music office, it's mostly music storage, paper music, and some instruments. It's also, Ruth uses that as an office space. And then, apart from that, there's not really much to note there. Let's see. We'll move on to the downstairs sanctuary bathrooms and bride's room. These are completely inaccessible as well. They're down a flight of stairs. They're supposed to serve as like the main bathrooms for the sanctuary, but it's not very practical. It's around the corner, down some stairs. It's not accessible for some people. Again, they're just kind of pretty dated and old. The windows in that hallway seem to be kind of falling into disrepair, so there's some issues there. The bride's room it's small and kind of cramped, and right now it's just currently used for storage. And let's see, I think we're going to move on to the preschool, and Ron is going to come up and talk about that.
Good afternoon. I am going to be talking about several things related to the preschool and the nursery area, preschool classrooms. Slides 16 and 17 is the preschool office and the nursery area. It's very accessible, which is a very good thing. It's an excellent location on our campus. And due to the accessibility, we talked about the fact that at some time that might be a great place for the church office. As far as the cons related to the preschool office and nursery area, the rooms are very overcrowded, they're cluttered, and they're unorganized, and I'm a Felix, so that bothered me a lot. The question that was of most concern to us is whether or not they would pass fire and safety codes. Because when you have children, that's a big thing. And so that would be something that needs to be done sooner than later. The necessary changes in these two areas they need to be cleared out, organized, and updated, and the fire and safety codes needs to be addressed. Slides 19, 20, and 21 are the preschool classrooms. Those are classrooms number 12, 13, and 14. 12 only has a capacity for 12 children. 13 and 14 has a capacity for 20 children, so that's much more workable. These are accessible rooms. That's a pro. The capacity for 13 and 14 is 20 children, so that's a pro. The cons is there's really not much growth possibility for these three preschool classrooms. They're overcrowded, they're very cluttered, and they're very unorganized. They're not adjacent to the preschool office, the nursery, or the playground, so there's not a real connection there. They appear to be dated and neglected, and the necessary changes need to be cleared out, organized, and updated. And again, fire and safety codes need to be the number one priority when you're dealing with children.
Thank you, Ron. I'm going to be talking initially about the courtyard. Again, that's the space right out this door here that I think everyone's familiar with. Primarily used on a daily basis, I would say. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Chris Accio. Thank you. Needs to be up. The courtyard right out the door here, it's kind of the connector between the social hall / Rise worship space and the sanctuary. It is used primarily, I would say, on a daily basis by the preschool, and certainly on Sundays, it's always been a great place for us to have fellowship before and after services. That said, anyone who's been out there in the middle of the afternoon in the summertime knows that it has its limitations. It needs to have some shade, and anyone who's tried to use the facilities there knows that they desperately need to be updated and made more functional so everyone can use them accordingly. If we move on to the basement. So the basement, the first and biggest concern with the basement is the water intrusion. You can see in these pictures here, the water table is not far underneath the concrete foundation. So as you go through the pictures, you'll see that there's definitely some intrusion up into the interior walls, and one more kind of shows that, I think. There's been delaminating of all the floors in the classrooms down there, and quite honestly, it's really made that area unusable. You can see, and I think there's a video on that. Is it the middle one that has the video? Yeah, if you kind of click on click on the middle one. I am in the background. Okay. Yeah, there's definitely, you can see on the right that powder has dropped off. That was Carly kind of just poking the little bubble there, and powder was falling onto the floor. So it definitely is not functional and not safe. That whole area is not accessible. So anyone with a disability, it would be very difficult to get them in and out, and right now it's serving as storage. I think one of the biggest concerns, right, as we had experts come in and review this and try to figure out what we could do to actually make it usable space again. Ultimately, the pump system that we would need to install and the mitigation that we need would cost more than $200,000, and honestly, that would be the beginning, right? Because there's a lot of repairs that we'd have to do on top of that isn't included in that number if we decided we wanted to make that usable again. So at this point, there's things being stored down there, and that's about it for that section. The biggest fear, I think, is, again, the basement of the sanctuary is at the same elevation as the basement of the classrooms, or the basement classrooms. And, we're seeing signs of water intrusion in the sanctuary as well, which again is concerns for the foundation. We haven't explored it beyond that at this point. That is definitely something that's going to need to be explored to ensure that we're not putting this structure at risk. So that's all I have for this, and I'm not sure who's up next. I guess Carly.
Me again. So I'm kind of covering for everybody that we don't have. So we moved then upstairs, so the same education building upstairs. We just noted that the walkways, first of all, they kind of slope pretty drastically. The railings are like pretty loose. You can wobble them really easily. So there's just some safety concerns up there. And then just the entire upstairs, I mean, we don't have an elevator. It's not accessible. So that's a problem. I'm going to move on to the offices that are upstairs. Upstairs in that education building, we have the Director of Children's Ministry office, which is currently vacant. We don't have anyone in that position. The preschool director's office and the creative music leads office are up there. There's pictures of those offices. You can see the creative music leads doesn't have any furniture, and the other two are primarily being used for storage. So there's that. And then, let's see. There's an upstairs kitchenette up there, and off the kitchenette, there's like a small gathering room that has like a conference table. You can see that that is also being used primarily for storage. So those are not accessible rooms. They're kind of up and out of the way, and they're full of books right now and other storage. Moving on, we have the upstairs youth room. This is currently being used by Manatiel. They use it for their youth and then for Bible studies. It's great. It's really, it's been updated recently. If we're being nitpicky, it is like a little bit dated, but it's a great room. It's just located upstairs, and it's not accessible. So that's the problem there. And then we're going to move to that back building, located kind of off the alley there. The upstairs classrooms there. They're currently being used by Manatiel also. The first one is room 24. It's a decent sized room. It's just kind of long and narrow, and it's just, again, just cosmetic updates. But it's a pretty good little room, again, just not accessible. The middle room, room 25, is a little bit larger. It's in pretty good shape too. Room 26 is the room on the end. And one thing we want to know is, we did test the sound in between these rooms. So if we were to hold, say, Bible studies in all three rooms at once, it would be difficult just because there's a lot of sound transfer. Those walls aren't insulated well. And then there's just a little bit of deferred maintenance. It looks like there was a roof leak and the tiles just haven't been replaced there. And then we're going to move downstairs in that same building. We have at the far end is the craft room. And it's storing all of the UMW craft stuff. They have a small little table that they work in there. It's kept neat and tidy. It's kind of a small, awkward space, and it is mostly just storage. One thing we noted that it is, it's super one-dimensional, it is a craft room only. But other than that, it's in good shape. And then in the middle there, we have Godly Play Sanctuary. That used to be the lounge. It's now Godly Play for our children. And it looks great. It's recently been redone, new flooring, new paint and everything. The children love it in there. It's located right off Rise Sanctuary, so that's helpful. There's space to grow for there. We have currently 15-ish kids, and it will hold up to 30. So that's great. One of the changes is, I guess, the windows don't open. Is that correct? Yeah, the windows in that room don't open, so that would be nice if windows could function for them to have some fresh air. And then the door, per Safe Sanctuary rules, it should have, for the children's room, should have a window in it so that people can see into it at all times. That door doesn't. So they do have to keep it ajar. So it does get a little chilly in there sometimes for the kids if we have things at night. Moving on to room 15, which is that last little room before the social hall. It's just kind of an awkward shape. It's a really small room. It's a nice little room. Again, it's being used mostly for storage right now. And there is a lot of kind of built-ins in the back that do take up a little bit of space, but mostly it's just storing things. Moving on, the Rise worship space, or the social hall. So obviously, the limitation here is that it's the Rise worship space, but it's also supposed to be the social hall. So like it is one or the other. So if we want to use it for a social thing, we have to kind of deconstruct it and reconfigure it back into a social hall. And then obviously it's not, functioning super optimally for us because it is just a social hall. It wasn't intended to be a worship space, but we are, making it work. So that was the main thing. Oh, and then the kitchen is located off of it. So, if we're in there worshiping, nobody has access to that kitchen, which is also another limitation. And then the kitchen itself is on the trustees' list to update. It is dated. I think there's a lot of things that are out of code. It's a big space. It's just kind of awkwardly laid out, and it does have these kind of weird spaces off of it that make it a little tricky. It needs to be updated. It needs to be brought up to code. A new kitchen would be great. And then next is, I'm so sorry. You know what? I got on a roll because I told you I'm filling in for other people that aren't here. Ron is up. He's going to finish us off here.
One thing we know for sure, Methodists like to eat. That is one thing the committee didn't have to be told. So when we looked at the kitchen, we all like to eat. We knew that needed our attention because the heart of hospitality in our church and in most churches is the kitchen. And so the main kitchen and the adjacent storage area is something that we need to deal with. The fact that it's close to the patio, close to the social hall is a plus. The problems, of course, Carly has talked a little bit about. It's unusable. It's simply worn out. When you look at that kitchen, it's simply worn out. It's not up to code, present code. It's poorly designed for what we would like to use it for today. The appliances are outdated. We've taken a look at that, at maybe replacing some of those, but sometimes when you remodel a house, it costs more than when you tear it down and start over. And this kitchen might fall into that venue. It's pretty unusable, as Carly said, when we have worship session going on there. The church needs a kitchen. So necessary changes, we need to bring it up to date, and we need a new design, and we need a new equipment. It's as simple as that. The next is slide 48, which is our chapel. It's easily acceptable. It could be a holy space designed for worship, prayer, small ceremonies. We used to have a small service there every morning. I think it's a fabulous room. The sound is a problem if the social hall is in use. We realize that. But the thing that I'm maybe most concerned about, and this might just be me, but the committee talked about it, the columbarium has some people interned in there that were very important in this church. And it's pretty disrespectful to just use it as a storage room. And I, for one, would like to see that cleaned out so that if I wanted to come down here on a Tuesday morning and pray, I'd be able to. If I had people interned there, I would be able to visit. And so that would be an easy fix. All it needs, it doesn't need a lot of money, it just needs to be cleaned out. And so I've kind of said my piece on that, but that one really concerns me. Slide 49 is the kitchenette and the preschool storage area. This is the one where you can get coffee off of the patio. It's a place for snack preparation and coffee service. It's adjacent to the patio, so it's a good spot. The problems with it, it's very tight space. It wouldn't accommodate wheelchairs. It would only allow 2 people in there, basically. and it has to be shared with preschool because they're using it for some of their activities. What we recommended as necessary changes is it needs to cease being a storage area. And I think you're going to see as a common thread throughout our whole report, it's like if we've lived in a house for 45 years. We've got stuff we don't need. We got stuff everywhere that we don't need. We need to, before we spend a lot of money on new things, we need to clean up what we've got. That's the end of my sermon.
As far as our report goes, I'll be closing it out, first talking about the meeting house and the garden. The garden itself, I think, as we've gone through COVID, that became, I think, the first place where we worshiped together again on Sundays, so there were some improvements made there. What became very apparent was it wasn't very accessible. So I think that's something that between that and the house accessibility is something that definitely needs to be addressed. And once you go into the house, it's quite broken up, and there is one medium-sized space, I think, where you could certainly hold a meeting, but the kitchen really isn't functional. The bathrooms in somewhat disrepair. And really it's just not a great functional space. So I think that is definitely something that would need to be updated to be able to make it more usable and functional. And then lastly is the playground in the park, which is kind of behind the rear building. And if it's behind a rear building, that means it's really not accessible, right? It's not really part of the campus. It's kind of the backside of the campus, if you will. It's not very convenient for the folks that really would use it the most, which is the preschool and certainly any Sunday school children's group. So, at the end of the day, the space itself is pretty good, I would say. It has some natural, or it has some canopies there for shade. The equipment may need to be updated a little bit, but overall, it's a good space. It's just not well centered or easy to access. And that's all I have. Thank you. Back to Carly.
Okay, so that was kind of our run-through of the campus. Just to kind of go over some common themes. We have a large campus. We have a lot of rooms. We have a lot of great space and potential for space. Some of the issues are definitely a majority of our rooms are being used for storage. So it's not really clear. I mean, obviously they need to be cleared out. Like that's an issue. It could be that we have a lack of storage also adding to that, but that's hard to tell. Everything's kind of aging, that's apparent. Our church is old, and so everything is kind of aging. And then, of course, the water intrusion issues are a major issue that needs to be addressed. And then just the general layout, preschool being so disjuncted is difficult. It makes it hard for safety procedures to be in place, and everything is just, there's no real great flow. So those are the things that we identified. We're making it work, we're doing the best we can, but it doesn't really seem like very much of this is functioning optimally for our church. Those were our feelings, and we have, what time is it? Does anybody? We'll do like 10 minutes of just if you have questions that you need clarification on, or if you have any burning questions, but really our intent with this was to send you all home, let you guys think about this, really kind of over pray on it, and then come back, because what we really want to do is have we want to be able to dedicate a lot of time to answering questions and having a discussion. So Earl has a question.
Well, first, what a monumental job. Thank you so much for all the work that the committee put into this. What I didn't hear mentioned, and I think is a significant part of our plan, is the garage and parking lot on 4th Street and the 3rd Street parking lot. And I just wanted to know if those are to be included in the overall plan.
I think they absolutely should be. Yeah, I mean, all of the church's space should be looked at. Yeah, I guess we failed to kind of look at that, but we do have a storage garage across the way and a parking lot, and then a parking lot in the back. Any other questions, clarifications? Yes.
I was going to I was going to ask about requirements. So that wasn't really touched on today. So we went through a nice review of all the spaces and the issues associated with those. But the other half of that equation is, what do we need? How many classrooms do we need? How big of a sanctuary do we need? What do we need in order to support various groups that make up our congregation? So once we start looking at requirements, then you can start to shape this thing. So anyway, I think that's an area we need to touch on over time.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is something that we'll get to. For us, our committee is really to just, like I said, to form kind of a recommendation as far as next steps. So it could be that that's probably something that the next step would include. Anything else?
Just a weird question. Storage is obviously an issue. Are we storing office things or preschool things, or are you able to tell what we're storing?
A lot of the rooms appear to, it is everything. I mean, it really truly is everything. The bride's room downstairs has like random furniture in it. Kind of the offices upstairs seem to be mostly preschool stuff. Downstairs is Sunday school, preschool type things, and like furniture even. It's a little bit of everything, and it's everywhere. Yes, that too.
I'm interested in whether you look at the library.
The library that's located off the social hall?
Yes.
Yeah, we've glanced in there. I guess we didn't include it. Being off of the Rise worship space, it does make it difficult to use it as a library. And then I think that there was somebody in charge of it. Is that correct? And oh, you're in charge of it? Kind of.
That was iffy.
Oh, iffy.
Iffy mainly because we don't feel we have access.
Yes, which is a problem. Where should Rise go then? Because, so it is a problem. It is a problem that we can't have a social hall. It is a problem that Rise has to be functioning out of the social hall. It does, having our worship space there does block off access to things that people should have access to. Yes. Hold on, because for the live stream, we have to have you on a mic.
Well, that library also has a large table. It's good for small meetings, but it's hard to get into, not even on a Sunday. It's hard to get into.
Yeah, absolutely. It is kind of tucked away, weird. Mm-hmm.
How much use does the library get?
Right now, not that much, because it is an access issue.
It seems that several of the problems you described would go away if we got caught up on maintenance. Or if we maybe had some storage containers in the 4th Street parking lot, would that be part of the proposal at one end of the spectrum, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an option. And that, I mean, this is also why we're here. We want to hear, people's opinions. I would hate to see bringing in storage containers into a parking lot that we're already not using. I mean, it just seems like that's just another way to store things that we're not using.
I'm not sure the city will allow us to put storage containers in 3rd Street. We looked at that about 5 years ago, and they said, it's not a good idea. That's not what it's intended for.
Okay.
Just a real quick comment on the storage. Right after I retired, Lori Schwartz and I were asked to clear out some of the rooms upstairs, music room, preschool, and we spent days just clearing it out to the point that they were really usable. I need to see these pictures of all these, where this stuff is coming from, I don't know, but we took tons and tons and tons of stuff to trash and to recycle wherever you can imagine. So, it's a definite problem, but if we're going to have a campus that's nothing but a storage unit, then let's charge for storage, because this is disheartening.
Yeah. And then Kay over here has another question.
Just wondering, this is was there something in plan to do of all the things that there has been stored over the years and the years that we don't use? Because, I mean, you know how you mentioned there's furniture in several rooms that it's just being there as, I don't know, store them. I don't know, have they considered maybe doing a garage sale and selling for $10, making something out of it? Or like the books, I see that there's a lot of kids' books, put them out one day, garage sale, and in hopes that we can sell everything, and if not, donate the rest, instead of, having another storage and storing the same, I'm going to say it this way, storing the same trash again.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Get your exercise. I know you asked for questions, and I'm trying to phrase it as a question, but as I look at a lot of the stuff that's in storage from the pictures, there are things that were being used up until the time of COVID. A lot of it was furniture from the lounge that's now the Godly Play area. And I know there were study materials from Common Ground that were in room 15 and in the lounge that would probably still be used if the Common Ground had access to them. So I guess I'd hope before things get discarded that we try to figure out who the owners are and whether or not it really is trash or whether it's usable things. So, and the other thing is, in your report, which was excellent, I thought, I think there should be some consideration for groups that use those spaces prior to COVID that haven't had access to them since COVID. Just anyway, consideration.
Yeah, that's great input, and I do think that COVID, if you're not using a room, then people just kind of tend to shove things into it. So I do think that COVID kind of exacerbated the issue. But, I do, just thinking back, what were we using those rooms for prior to COVID? Storage is certainly an issue. We for sure need to work on clearing out the storage so that we can use what we have, I agree. But just as far as our committee's job, as far as analyzing the physical spaces, there are some other issues other than just storage as well. I just want to point that out. Anything else? Yes.
Hi, Earl again. what you just said raises an interesting idea, I think, that what you've done is this great start on the analysis of our facilities. Do we have a parallel or tangent or whatever it is study in mind to explore program needs as far as our existing congregations, and we talk about community being beyond ourselves? What are the needs of the community that this church might be identified as the source for, to meet? And so that when we get to putting those two pieces together, then we've got a really vibrant program and a really accessible and usable facility. And that sounds like where we ought to be going.
Thank you, Earl. That's kind of what we feel as well after looking at the space. That would definitely be a next step, would be a committee to look into that. What are our needs is certainly the next step.
I'll only speak to that as the pastor who's reading the book of discipline and helping guide that process. I might, and Beth might be the only people who've been through a study committee process. We did this at a former church, so this is some familiar territory. And that's the next question. And it's the other half of the work of the study committee is first to analyze space and then ask, what are the programs that we currently have? And COVID just changes that. That's all. That conversation. And we're moving out of COVID, so we'll advance that conversation. And then it's bringing them together. Remember, this is a progress report. There's no decisions that are made. We're still garnering information. This is where we were. This is where we are. And what Earl lifted up about the connection between the programmatic life, ministry life of the church, and the spaces we do that in is the next step. And before any decisions are ever made, that process has to be fulfilled, and that's actually part of the study committee's report, will be to begin opening that door, and whether it's this group or the next group that takes that on. That's the disciplinary process. So we're following the process that's before us as United Methodists.
So with that, if no one has any other questions, then we'll kind of say a closing prayer and move on. You guys all have access. You should have access to this in your email, so I do encourage you to read through it, take a look, think about it, pray about it. I really hope you come back next week, because I really would. We want all the feedback we can get from everybody. We have our own kind of feelings that we've felt, but part of our job is to hear everybody else's feelings too, so that we can give a recommendation that, matches how our church feels as a whole. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that if you feel the need that you want to see some of these spaces with your own eyes, feel free to let us know. We're happy to take you on a little tour. But other than that, Ben, were you going to close us out in prayer? Thanks.
Church, let us pray. If you'll bow your heads with me. God, thank you for gathering us, calling us into this community in this moment, but more importantly, our lives into this church that is called to extend your love and grace into the world, into our community. We want to do that well. We want to do it in tune and in step with you. We want to be good stewards of the rich history that we've received, this space that we have, the ministries going on and the ministries yet to be born, God. I pray that you will continue to guide us through this process to be your church as best we can here in Escondido. Be with us as we go from this place. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.